Subscribe to True Tears Stories for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The laughter at the table wasn't cruel on the surface, but Ethan felt it settle under his skin like a splinter. They were all there. His wife Rachel, her older brother Greg, their parents, and a couple of family friends. A casual backyard dinner, the kind Rachel insisted they host every month or so. Something about staying close, keeping traditions alive. Greg had just finished telling a story about Ethan's failed attempt to assemble a fire pit last fall. I mean, the manual literally said no tools required, Greg said, smirking. And this guy managed to use every wrench in the garage and still couldn't get the thing lit. More laughter. Light, easy, but not to Ethan. What stung wasn't the joke. It was Rachel's smile. Not amused, not protective, just complicit. She leaned in toward her brother, touched his arm, and laughed like she was in on it. Like Ethan was the punchline, not the partner. Ethan forced a chuckle. He reached for his wine and took a slow sip, trying to ground himself in the flavor, the temperature, anything but the heat rising in his chest. He glanced around the table. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and didn't care. He thought he'd imagined the shift in her lately, how she deferred to Greg more, how her jokes had taken a sharper edge, how she'd stopped correcting people when they mischaracterized him as a little boring but sweet. Maybe it had started gradually. A shrug here, an eye roll there. Now, it felt like a stage and he was playing the part of the tolerated husband. Later, when the guests had trickled out and the tiki torches flickered their last, Ethan and Rachel began clearing dishes in silence. "You okay?" she asked lightly, stacking salad plates. He hesitated. "Did you hear what Greg said?" She raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" "The part where he made fun of me, again." Rachel shrugged. "He was joking." "And you?" Ethan asked, quieter now. "You thought it was funny too?" She paused, then looked at him like he was being sensitive. "It wasn't that serious, Ethan." But to him, it was. Not because Greg had told a story, not even because it made him look like an idiot, but because Rachel had smiled, genuinely, and said nothing. They used to be on the same side. He could remember parties years ago where she would subtly steer conversation away from his awkwardness, gently rescue him from her family's bluntness with a touch on his arm, a knowing look. She used to see him. Now, he wasn't sure what she saw. That night, after the dishwasher hummed to life, Ethan lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling. Rachel scrolled through her phone, unreadable. He finally asked, "Do you think Greg respects me?" She laughed under her breath. "Why do you care? He's always been like that." "That's not an answer," Rachel sighed, locking her phone. "Greg just has a big personality, okay? Don't take it so personally. He teases everyone." Ethan rolled away from her, not out of spite, but to preserve what was left of his calm. He'd always believed that relationships lived in the quiet moments, not the grand gestures. But lately, their quiet moments felt less like connection and more like avoidance. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for something much harder to find, alignment. But in that silence, all he could hear was her laugh, sharp, unbothered, echoing from earlier that evening. The next morning, she made coffee and kissed him on the cheek like nothing happened. Like he hadn't spent the night wondering if their closeness had become performance. And when he watched her pour oat milk into her mug, humming along to a playlist she used to build for both of them, but now curated alone. He knew something had shifted, not overnight, but clearly. Rachel could be loving, thoughtful, but lately she'd become fluent in omission, the kind of kindness that skipped the hard truths. As he left for work, Ethan looked back once, just once, at her standing in the kitchen. She was smiling at her phone again, and it hit him, subtle but sharp. Maybe she wasn't ignoring the problem. Maybe she just didn't see it as one. Ethan spent the next few days replaying that backyard dinner in fragments. Not the laughter itself, but Rachel's expression. The tilt of her head, the way she reached for her wine glass just as Greg launched the punchline. It wasn't just that she hadn't defended him. It was how easy it seemed for her to participate. It nagged at him during the drive to work, slipped into the pauses between client meetings, whispered into his thoughts as he tried to wind down each evening. And maybe, he thought, it would have passed if it had only happened once. But that kind of dismissal, it wasn't new. It was just finally too loud to ignore. Rachel's family had always been close in a way that felt suffocating to outsiders. Family dinners every Sunday, a group chat that buzzed from dawn till night, nicknames that never evolved, inside jokes from decades ago. Ethan had once admired it, mistaken the tight orbit for warmth. But in recent years, he'd started to understand the price of inclusion, silence. If you wanted to belong, you didn't rock the boat. And for a while, he hadn't. He let Greg's jabs slide, let her mother's polite critiques of their apartment decor slide, even smiled through Rachel's occasional digs about his job being safe, because he thought love was about letting things go. But he wasn't sure what he'd let go of anymore. And when something inside you starts asking, was that respect? Too many times, it becomes hard to answer without unraveling something deeper. The next Friday, they attended Rachel's cousin's birthday dinner, another event Ethan hadn't really been asked about, just informed of. Greg's bringing someone new, Rachel said as they parked. Be nice. Ethan forced a smile. I'm always nice. She didn't respond, just reapplied her lip gloss in the car mirror and stepped out. The restaurant was noisy, trendy, everyone clustered at a long table in the back. Greg arrived late, loud, and already half a drink in. He slapped Ethan on the back hard enough to make the man in front of him turn around. Still wearing khakis, huh? Greg grinned. You really do commit to the bit. Rachel laughed, not a chuckle. An open, clear laugh. And that's when something broke. Not in a dramatic, scene-stealing way, just a quiet fracture. Ethan didn't return the grin, didn't laugh, didn't even shrug it off. He just looked at Rachel, long enough for her to notice the weight in his eyes. She looked away. Dinner was fine, technically. Pasta. More wine than necessary. Conversations layered over one another. But Ethan didn't really engage. He nodded when addressed, laughed when prompted, and watched Rachel more than he meant to. Watched how she didn't correct anyone when they made assumptions about their life. Watched how Greg got louder the more Rachel smiled. Watched how every compliment about his calmness came with a side order of condescension. He's just so stable, Rachel's cousin said at one point, nudging her playfully. You always know where he'll be. Rachel smiled. Yeah, he's solid. Solid, like a wall, like furniture. That night, Ethan didn't wait for her to bring it up. As soon as they got home, he sat on the edge of the bed, still in his shoes. Can I ask you something? He said. Rachel was in the closet, hanging up her coat. Sure. Do you think you're better than me? She paused. What? You laugh at me. With your brother, your family. You tell stories that make me look like I'm a joke. And when I don't laugh, you say I'm sensitive. She came into view slowly. Where is this coming from? He looked up. From all the moments you thought I wouldn't notice. Rachel crossed her arms. You're overthinking again. That's what you always say, Ethan replied. But what if I'm not? What if I'm just finally saying something out loud? She sat across from him on the bed, eyes narrow. I don't think I'm better than you. But you don't respect me either. Not when it matters. Rachel looked away. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve. You're reading into things. Maybe. Or maybe I've spent too long pretending things didn't sting, just because you said they were jokes. Silence. Then, why now? She asked. Why are you bringing all this up? Because I watched you laugh with Greg, like I wasn't standing there, and that's not the first time. It just finally felt like one time too many. She shook her head, frustrated. Greg's always been like that. Then why doesn't it bother you when he mocks me? Because he doesn't mean it. Ethan stood up. You don't get to decide that for me. Rachel didn't follow him when he left the room. That night, Ethan slept on the couch, not out of anger, but self-preservation. The cushions were stiff, the blanket too short, but the space was his, quiet, honest. He stared at the ceiling, just like he had during that backyard dinner, and wondered, not if Rachel had changed, but if he had finally stopped pretending he hadn't. The following morning, the apartment was silent in a way that made the walls feel farther apart. Ethan brewed coffee without the usual soft music Rachel played on weekends. He didn't miss it. He didn't miss her casual humming behind the steam of the espresso machine either. She emerged an hour later, hair in a low bun, wrapped in the robe he'd bought her last Christmas. We need to talk, she said, not asking. Ethan nodded toward the chair across from him. I'm listening. But she didn't sit, just stood there, arms crossed, like she was preparing to deliver a thesis rather than a conversation. I think you're taking things personally that were never meant that way, she began, voice carefully measured. My family jokes. We've always joked. That's how we communicate. And I'm telling you, Ethan said quietly, that it stopped being funny a long time ago. Rachel exhaled, frustrated. So what now? You want me to what? Correct my brother at every dinner? Police every sentence? No, Ethan said. I want you to notice, to care, to stand next to me instead of behind the laughter. Her eyes flashed. I do stand by you. Not when it counts. She went silent at that. Ethan stood, carrying his mug to the sink. It's not just about Greg. It's about all the moments you've let me be small, so someone else could feel big. And I let it happen because I thought being quiet was the same as being strong. Rachel stepped closer. So you think I'm cruel now? He turned, leaning back against the counter. No, I think you're careless. And I don't know which is worse. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was revealing. The kind that fills a room when something unspoken has finally stepped into the light. I never meant to make you feel that way, she said, softer. But I did feel that way, Ethan replied, and you never asked. That night, Ethan stayed in the guest room. He didn't declare it, didn't make a show of moving his charger and toothbrush. He just did it, and Rachel didn't stop him. In the days that followed, they lived in a strange rhythm, coexisting, polite, but distant in the way that people get when one of them has broken a spell of assumed comfort. The texts from Rachel were purely logistical. Are you home for dinner? What time is your meeting tomorrow? Can you pick up more coffee pods? Ethan answered, always, briefly, respectfully. But something had shifted, not just between them, but within him. He'd always imagined himself as a low-maintenance partner, easygoing, steady. But he was beginning to see how that had been interpreted as optional, as someone whose boundaries were always flexible, whose feelings were background noise to someone else's performance. One evening, Ethan received a text from Rachel's brother. Greg, heard you've been in a mood. Everything good? Ethan stared at it, then typed, Ethan, you crossed a line more than once. Greg, man, it was just a joke. Ethan, not to me. Greg, Rachel's not complaining. Ethan, maybe that's the problem. He didn't send it. He deleted the thread entirely instead. It wasn't about Greg, not really. It was about who Rachel chose to laugh with and who she never defended out loud. Later that week, Rachel called her mother while Ethan was in the next room. She didn't know he could hear her voice through the cracked office door. I don't know what's going on, she said, low and tight. He's acting like I betrayed him, like one dinner ruined everything. Then a pause. No, he didn't yell. That's the thing. He's just quiet, like I'm talking to a closed door. Another pause. Yeah, maybe he's more sensitive than I thought. Ethan closed the laptop. That word again, sensitive. As if awareness was fragility. As if noticing patterns was weakness. He stepped out of the office before she hung up, just so she'd know he'd heard. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But the look on her face said enough. That weekend, Rachel went to brunch alone. She left a note instead of asking. Back around 2. Please water the ficus. Ethan did water the ficus, but while he did, he noticed the way the roots had curled to the shape of the pot. No more room to grow. When she returned, the apartment was neat. Ethan was gone. Just for a walk, he'd texted, but it was more than that. He sat in the park, phone off, watching strangers pass by in clusters of conversation and casual affection. It wasn't longing he felt. It was observation. He was paying attention now. He realized then that his quiet had been a kind of self-erasure. The compromise of not wanting to be difficult had made him invisible. And the worst part? Rachel hadn't even noticed he was vanishing. When he returned home, she was waiting at the door. Can we talk? Ethan paused, then stepped inside. Rachel didn't sit this time. She stood near the kitchen island, arms folded, the same way she had when they first argued. But something in her eyes looked less defensive, more like she was bracing for something final. I've been thinking, she started, about what you said, about the way I didn't show up for you. Ethan stepped into the living room slowly, leaving space between them. Okay. She exhaled, searching. I don't know when I stopped noticing the difference between teasing and hurting. It's always been the way my family talks. If you flinch, you lose. Ethan nodded. And I've been losing in silence for years. That landed. Rachel looked down, pressing her lips together. I never meant for Greg to treat you that way, and I never meant for me to let it happen. But you did. I did, she said quietly. They stood there for a beat, the air between them not charged, but exposed. "I don't want this to be it," Rachel said. "I don't want to lose you over something I should have caught sooner." Ethan looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. "It's not just about Greg. It's about how invisible I've felt, how I've made myself small to make the room more comfortable for you and your family." "You've never been small to me." He smiled, soft and sad. "You didn't notice when I shrank." Rachel sat then, slowly, like her legs had lost their argument. "So what now?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He sat across from her, hands folded, calm. "I've been wondering if I'm trying to save this because I still love you, or because I'm afraid of what starting over looks like." She blinked, stung by the honesty. "I think you care about me," Ethan continued, "but I think you've gotten used to loving me on autopilot. And I let you." Rachel's eyes shone now, wet, but not spilling. "You're saying you want to leave." "I'm saying," Ethan said gently, "that I'm already halfway gone." The truth lived in the quiet that followed. She didn't deny it, didn't reach for a desperate promise or sudden warmth. Because deep down, Rachel knew too, something had frayed and unraveled slowly, and neither of them had tried to stitch it back together until the tear had become a split. "I'm not angry," Ethan said. "I'm just tired of being the one who notices, the one who absorbs, the one who always folds first so the moment doesn't break." "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "Then maybe don't," he replied. "Maybe start by seeing it." Later that night, Rachel packed a weekend bag. Not because they declared a separation, but because space was finally something she understood wasn't a punishment. It was a pause, a boundary, an invitation to choose differently. Ethan helped her carry the bag to the door. No fight, no final word. As she turned to leave, she said, "Will you call me?" "Not right away," he said, "but maybe, if something real grows from this." She nodded once, then left. The apartment felt wider without her, not heavier. The silence wasn't a threat anymore. It was a choice. Ethan moved through the rooms slowly that weekend, cleaned without rushing, sat on the balcony with a book he never had time to finish, listened to music that didn't remind him of anyone. On Sunday, he texted his sister back. She'd invited him to a small dinner next week. "I'll come. And yeah, I'm okay. Just finally seeing things for what they are." That night, he opened his laptop. Not to work, just to write. The document was titled, "Things I Know About Myself Now." He didn't list hurts or regrets. He wrote, "I am not hard to love. I am not too sensitive. I am not overreacting when I feel dismissed. I am worth being stood beside, out loud. And if someone can't do that, they don't get to call it love." The next morning he brewed coffee, watched the light shift through the blinds, and didn't brace himself for anything. He just breathed, and it felt like the start of something solid. In the days that followed, Ethan didn't rush to fill the silence Rachel left behind. He didn't call. He didn't text. He simply let the quiet stretch, like an ache that finally had room to breathe. It surprised him how steady he felt, how little anger there was, replaced instead by something softer, something resembling peace. The house still smelled faintly of her perfume, lingering in corners she used to occupy. A cardigan draped over the back of the couch. Her favorite mug still in the cabinet. But none of it demanded anything from him now. It was just evidence of a chapter closed, not a wound. Ethan spent more time outside, morning walks, coffee on the porch. He let himself listen to things he'd tuned out for years: birds, traffic, the breeze combing through the trees. He was learning, slowly, that distance didn't have to be cold. Sometimes it was where clarity lived. He didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the point. He felt clean. The betrayal hadn't broken him. It had returned him to boundaries, to discernment, to the quiet truth that not all relationships fail. Some simply reveal who was never truly in them to begin with. Rachel might rewrite the story in her own way. Maybe she already had. But Ethan had no need to correct her version. He had lived the truth. He had felt the silence. He had stood in the room where his dignity was once laughed at and chosen not to raise his voice, but to walk out with it intact. There was no final speech, no dramatic door slam, just one man, alone in his space, finally unburdened by needing to be understood. And that, he thought, was enough.